Hello, I'm Juliet Foster and I'm delighted to welcome you to X-Bank Talks from Publicis Sapient, the series that shines a light on the next generation of banking. Now, in this series, we're talking to banking leaders about the future of the industry, discussing challenges and, of course, finding solutions. And today, we're going to be talking about how banks can prepare for the rise of digital ecosystems, partnerships and embedded finance, both strategically and technically. They are big subjects, which is why I'm delighted to say that I have some help, an expert panel. Let's meet them. First up, we've got Vinita Ramtree. Now, she's the Global Head of API Standards and Governance at HSBC. It is very good to see you.
Same here.
Thank you so much. And Dan Globerson. Now, Dan is the Head of the Bank of APIs at NatWest Group. It's a very complicated title. That's why I jumped over it, you see.
It is, but it's a complicated business that we make easy for customers.
Ah, right, OK.
But Juliet, always a pleasure, just the same.
Synergy. Joris Henson, who's the founder and co-lead of Deutsche Bank's API programming. It's very good to see you, or program, I should say, just the one, but you've probably got multiple programs built into that as well. And then Ronnie Mitra. Now, he's the Director of Technology at Publicis Sapient. It's good to see you, Ronnie.
You as well.
Fantastic. OK, lots to cover. Let's dive straight in. Dan, you've drawn the short straw. Aren't you happy?
Thank you for that, Julia. Always.
But look, embedded finance, it's another way, of course, in which the traditional structure of banking is being upended, disrupted, call it what you will. But how do banks themselves manage this new way for customers to access financial products?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think embedded finance in itself is new. I just think we've talked more about it recently because we've moved a little bit beyond payments. But looking back, if we look at the likes of PayPal and others, we've had embedded finance now for a few decades. But I think what we're moving towards is frictionless customer experiences where we're looking to embed more financial products in there, whether it's borrowing, whether it's potentially digital identification or contract guarantee or the like, almost any product, a mortgage, for instance. So I think that's certainly changing now. And I think from a bank perspective, it causes us to change our thinking a little bit. It causes us to, one, think about our relationship with customers, which historically were obviously physical and branch. Moved on to telephony, if you're old enough like I am, moved on to mobile banking, and now we're talking about reaching customers and providing services to customers through channels that we don't necessarily own. And more than that, also possibly redefining the concept of customer, where it's not just customers who happen to have a current account or a product at the bank now, but almost any member of the public that you could provide a product to through these channels. So I think it's changing the definition of customer a little bit as well.
If I could just add to that point a little bit, you know, when you mentioned the word frictionless, I always think with financial services, the key thing that comes up is also adding friction where it's required, because you don't want banking to be, you want it to be easy but responsible. So it's about also looking out for people who are more vulnerable and need that little bit extra help.
To take them on this journey, because it's a big journey, it's unstoppable. But Ronnie, coming to the conversation, because, you know, we heard Dan's take on embedded finance. It's been around for a wee while. But it's not just the principle of it, it's everything that goes with it too. So is the banking industry really ready for embedded finance as such? And how should banks be making embedded finance actually work for them so that it's a successful transition?
I think they're definitely ready. I mean, that's what we heard, right? I mean, to join the ecosystem, they're already part of the ecosystem. But I think the underlying question is really, it's not about are they ready, are they ready to lead? Are they ready to shape it? Are they ready to really like take it by the horns? And I'm not convinced that all banks are. I think there is a lack of clarity around who that customer is in the ecosystem, what it means to be a bank and a provider, really shaping what the value proposition is in an embedded finance sense. So those are the things I would suggest banks need to start doing. Are they infrastructure providers, customer relationship managers, or something else, right? And that's probably the first step.
Clearing the fog, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, Vinita, look, we can talk about partnerships and what makes them successful, etc. But at the end of the day, you've got to get the right structure and also the technology, absolutely crucial. So what insights do you have from your role at HSBC on making sure that banks are putting the right systems in place? You can find a fantastic partner, but if you haven't got the architecture, it's going to die.
I think that's spot on. And like we say, in any example, again, you know, going back to the food point, you know, it's a restaurant, but ultimately you got the kitchen, right? If I work with that.
It's a change from Amazon.
It is, yeah, it's a change from Amazon for sure. But the whole point is the architecture. You've got to have integrated systems and, you know, ultimately it's about thinking as one platform for the customers. Because structurally, if I go back to your structure question here, is that the way banks have been operating, you've got product pillars. So historically, you've got product pillars saying, I'm good at, I do cards, or, I serve corporates, I serve, different, these are my products. But how do you bring that together through a simple architecture layer, and so that customers can have a seamless experience and are not fragmented by having to deal with different parts of the bank in different ways. It all needs to come together. So whether this is businesses, the operating model, or the technology, everything needs to realign to that mindset.
Stay with this, Ronnie, because look, you've got incredible insight from across the financial services space, but what are the key takeaways that you've drawn from your experience that you believe banks should be implementing now? Because they're under pressure, and as you said, there's a lot of fragmentation as well in terms of who's leading, what is it we do, where do we start?
I think the first thing banks need to do today is figure out where they fit in this world. So as incumbents, are we defending our position? Do we hope to lead? Is there a specific segment of the market that you want to attack, right? It has to start with that, and we need to start having those conversations and lay that down. Then I think the second thing is banks need to change the operating model so that we're not API-ifying capabilities, right? Instead, you're building an operating model with a product team that understands the jobs to be done of the personas to achieve the strategy we talked about, right? And then the third thing is, just from a pure technology perspective, are our services ready to be 24/7, real-time, scalable, with predictive capacity and performance and composable? Well, that turns out to be really tough when you've got 50 to 100 years worth of tech legacy, right? So all three of those streams need to be attacked at the same time.
Okay, the dreaded legacy technology. But I mean, Joris, when we talk about partnerships, it's great because you see the advantages, but at the same time, and I think that Ronnie put his finger on this earlier, there's the risk of decoupling, that today's partner becomes tomorrow's rival. But what can be done to mitigate the risks so that you can maximise the opportunities and get the best out of this relationship for as long as it's destined to last?
Yeah, I think it's really look at okay, what is the partnership, what we want to build together, what is the problem we are solving? Is this a fit also to as a bank, our business model? Do we have the data capabilities? Because often enough it happens, okay, you have to build something new. Do you want to invest it? Is it repeatable for you as a bank? Can someone else work out something out of this? And I think at the same time, it's about understanding what is the data used for. Does the partner need the data, really all the data? Because it's really critical from a customer perspective. I mean, no customer says, I want to use open banking or embedded finance. Mm-hmm. They want to use a product, right? And they want to feel secure because it's sensitive data. So the customer has to give the consent, and you don't want to have this messed up. So I think this is a critical risk. So you have to look into it. You have to select partners carefully. And you have to be also honest, Ronnie, what you said earlier, to say okay, every side can decide maybe at some point in time you split paths.
Hey, Dan, I think you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, no, I think there's all good points. There's probably one contrasting point. I don't know. I think Ronnie was spot on around dealing with legacy and all the rest. But I think it is difficult for an incumbent or any participant in the financial services to predict where things are going. I honestly do think it's difficult. And from that perspective, I think it's a question of how do we architect financial services and adjacent services for the future, not knowing how things are going to work out, not knowing, are we going to be going back to a bit more physical? Are we staying in digital, particularly post-pandemic? Is this Web 3.0, is this metaverse thing really going to take off? And we need to have a presence in that space. And I think as we rethink a bank, I think we need to think more like tech companies, where we assume that all of our services could be experienced or delivered not only via our own channels, but by anyone's channels. And as we are re-engineering, which we often do, and redesigning the bank and its services, we think fully open.
Benita.
I think I really love that point from Dan, and just to continue on that thought about thinking, not knowing what's going to happen. I was reading about it somewhere in terms of even when we're starting to partner, we also have to think about when we're capturing data from customers, who actually owns that data? Is it the partner or is it us? So if you had to, unbundle that relationship in the future, what part of the data was provided to who to serve what purpose?
Or you say that data belongs to the customer. Then
Correct.
then it's
Data belongs to the
Carry that
customer.
data with you.
You know, and to GDPR requirements, you know, in terms of, you know, reg and everything else, you know, who's responsible for keeping what updated, who will retain what. So absolutely, I mean, I was just trying to agree with what you said.
But I also like your point, because it's a transformation on the inside, so that you have senior managers who allow you to spend time on an explorative journey where everyone is focused on short-term results and benefits, right?
I think you're
so
right,
you
Joris.
need to have the support. So that's, I think, is crucial on the inside. No?
Okay. I mean, look, I want to close this out by putting one final question to all of you. So, Ronnie, you start and then I'll move it around. But look, there is so much happening in this space, and I'm glad as well that you touched on the ownership of data, the sovereignty, etc. But what is the most important thing that banks should be doing today to prepare for this change? Because we're not talking about something which is just around the corner. It is here now. There are several corners that have to be turned. So, Ronnie, you first, and then we'll move it along.
Yeah, I think no matter what happens with all the uncertainty, I think orienting your internal capabilities around a flexible modular structure, and that includes the teams and the tech, right? So basically becoming the kind of company where you can compose capabilities into products, services, APIs, embedded finance, that's going to give you enough flexibility to survive. You should be doing that today.
Okay, Dan.
It's a big question. I think Ronnie's right in terms of flexibility and the ability to focus and refocus on the fly. I think that's huge. I think it's important for banks to recognize that we're not just active. We don't just provide financial services. We also provide trust services, and there's an increasingly important role for financial services and banks to play in that new digital world where we're trusted to hold data, we're trusted with privacy, and I think that's a huge opportunity that we shouldn't ignore.
Vanita.
I think the key thing for banks to do today is to take the entire organization along. Because I sometimes feel there are certain teams that are innovation, and, you know, like you said, risk is kind of left out of the room to say, first let's innovate, then we'll bring risk in later. But if we want to change, we have to change together. And we have to be on that cultural journey. That transformative thinking has to be embedded in the DNA of an organization. And I think that's where we miss a trick.
So cut out the silos, basically.
Yeah.
It's an excellent point.
Yeah. And Joris, the final point to you.
So I can only agree to what you say. I push this API first thinking, but I would like to add, we should also push the product way of thinking and no longer think in, this is the channel A, classic sales channels, but think in rather opportunities, and products that we can build for our customers, and do not limit ourselves to financial data and the concept we know today, but rather think across industries and the stuff we can build in the future.
Would anyone like to add to that at all? Because there's quite a lot of vigorous head nodding and the sense that I'm itching to add to that. Would anyone like to, before I close things out? Go on, Vanita, you know you want to, or is it Dan?
Go ahead.
Okay, Vanita and then Dan. And Ronnie as well, if you want to join in.
I think I totally agree with all the points we've made. You know, it is really about starting customer first, thinking through the problem, understanding what each unit is going to do, and how are we going to drive together.
I think that's right. I mean, it's hard to disagree with the points around bringing an entire organization along for the journey. It's hard to disagree with preparing and being flexible and being able to retask. It's hard to ignore the benefits of being part of ecosystems. I agree with all of it. I think we've done a pretty good job covering it as well.
I think we have. We've rearranged the sector.
Just one final point, if I might add.
Go on.
One final point. It's about the customer. So
one.
we're thinking about the bank right now, but as the point I made earlier, it's about the financial inclusion and sustainability, to saying what global problems can be solved, that we can solve, because there's so much that can be done with this power we've got.
Okay, look, some great thoughts as well, and it's nice to end on a consensus. That doesn't always happen. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So look, thank you so much for that. It's been a really stimulating discussion, and I know that our guests have provided us with so much that we can come away with some great thoughts. And I hope that you all have that as well. And all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon, where we will have another stab at putting the world to right.